everybody, welcome back with another video. Today we are going to finish our series in the Pacific War. Not really the whole series, the prelude of the series. And after this we're going to resume in episode 3 of the Pacific War. And today we're actually learning about why Japan decided to attack America. That's going to be an interesting one. And yes, I'm sorry, what the hell, there's ants? Oh, there's one ant. So after this there's going to be a new series, and it might actually be about a killer. Yes, a serial killer, and you'll see it maybe the next video. So yes, so like and subscribe everybody. Let's go right to the video. Okay, so here we go guys. I'm gonna start my recording, and yeah, this is okay, there we go. This is episode 0.7 of our reaction series in Pacific War. And after the series of the new series about killer, I'm going to resume episode 3. So yeah, so like and subscribe. Let's get right to the video.
With war raging in both Europe and in China.
Hold on, I'm just going to check the So yeah, last episode is about how the war in Europe influenced Asia. So yeah.
Prying eyes around the world eagerly followed the events that were unfolding in front of them. In the US in particular, many still advocated for anti-war sentiment, but President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had decided that he was not going to tolerate anymore the aggressions of the Japanese or the Germans. In 1941, he would finally draw a line to stop Japan that would surely risk war. And although FDR didn't want to fight against the Japanese, or at least not yet, this was a risk worth taking for the preservation of democracy around the world, a risk that would inevitably ignite the war in the Pacific. Welcome to our final prelude of the Pacific War, as the growing tensions between the US and Japan eventually ended in another act of aggression. By the way, don't forget to check out our podcast on the Pacific War. It has all the episodes in a long-form format with extra details. The link is in the description. And if you're interested in the history of the world...
Okay, so we're gonna skip this because maybe it's Magellan. Okay. Okay.
It is mid-1940, and Great Britain and China stand alone against the full might of Japan and the Axis. In Asia, the now 4-year-long conflict was completely depleting the resources of the Japanese Empire.
Yes, because the war is just in a huge stalemate right now, and yeah, Japan's morale was depleting, and they have to make another decision what to do next, because if they keep on attacking China, they might lose, and lose their territories in Manchuria and even Korea. So yeah.
Even though Japan already relied on other countries for the resources needed for its war material, the Americans alone provided them with 54.4% of their weapons and supplies, 76% of their aircraft, 59.7% of their scrap iron, 60.5% of their petroleum, and all of Japan's lubricating oil.
Key components for their imperial expansion. Key
machine tools, special steel, and high-test aircraft petrol.
Okay.
Furthermore, communist and nationalist guerrillas constantly harassed Japanese troops and sabotaged their infrastructure in occupied territories, and with each passing campaign, more and more soldiers were left behind to join these underground groups. The communists in particular were very capable of waging guerrilla warfare, as they had been doing so for the last 2 decades, and their experience allowed them to become ever more influential in the regions they defended, something that was not seen very fondly by their nationalist allies.
I don't know if he mentions that would be good, because this is the way Japanese fought in the war. And yeah, if you don't know, the nationalists and the communists are just allied to fight back the invaders, but don't remember that they're still at civil war. So
to fight against these guerrillas, the Japanese would resort to puppet units of the new, reorganized national government of the Republic of China, uniting all previous collaborationist states under Wang Jingwei's central government. But the Red Army would also prove that it was capable of executing important military operations, with Peng Dehuai's 100 Regiments offensive being launched in late August. Using a total of 400,000 soldiers, albeit poorly armed and equipped, over 115 regiments of the 8th Route Army, commanded by Zhu De, would attack railways and roads, and would target isolated Japanese strongpoints and forts all throughout northern China. The offensive would be very successful, inflicting more than 20,000 casualties, taking almost 3,000 strongholds, sabotaging many bridges, mines and tunnels, and destroying large tracts of railways.
But he didn't inform Mao Zedong, and because of that, Japanese changed their way of fighting, and we're gonna learn about the three all.
The operation was controversial, as Peng Dehuai initiated it without authorization from Mao Zedong, and would be criticized harshly for this. Although the Japanese response to guerrillas had always been brutal, the defeat against the communists had an unexpected consequence. Japan would adopt the 3 alls policy, as their forces would then start to kill all, loot all, and burn all.
Yep, the 3 all. And now they're going to fight more savagely, and the soldiers have their right of committing war crimes, and yeah.
With this bloodier response against Chinese resistance, many war crimes would be committed by Japanese soldiers, and resentment would erupt once again between nationalists and communists.
Okay, so first of all, the Kuomintang blamed Mao Zedong, and Mao Zedong blamed Peng Dehuai because of that. So yeah.
Chiang Kai-shek's followers blamed the Red Army, and Mao Zedong blamed Peng Dehuai,
like I said,
for the harsher Japanese acts. Furthermore, from October to December, Japanese counterattacks would successfully regain control of railway lines and would inflict heavy casualties on the 8th Route Army.
Jeez.
At this point, Japan knew that prolonging the war would be dangerous if foreign powers decided to intervene, so it needed to completely cut off the enemy capital at Chongqing from the foreign aid that it was receiving. Since the outbreak of the war, the British and Americans had been sending war material by sea to the main Chinese ports and Hong Kong, as well as through the railway connecting French Indochina to Yunnan and South Guangxi. Moreover, the Soviets, longtime rivals of Japan in the east, were also sending much aid through the old Silk Road.
But this is before Operation Barbarossa. If you know what Operation Barbarossa is, it's actually an operation that is made by Hitler to invade. And it's not maybe actually made by Hitler. I don't know. But it's an operation where the Nazis are going to invade Russia. Or the Soviet Union.
Although this would only last until the outbreak of Operation Barbarossa.
Operation Barbarossa.
With most of the main Chinese ports already occupied, and the British possessions in China surrounded, the Japanese then prepared for an offensive against Indochina, the last Chinese lifeline. In that regard, they had advanced up to the Indo-Chinese border by late July, taking the key district of Longzhou in South Guangxi. Already,
together we are Valorant.
My god. So yes, I don't know why. Seriously?
미안해서 어쩌나?
Okay, anyway, let's go.
already back in June, the fall of France had allowed Tokyo to issue a series of ultimatums demanding the closure of all supply lines to China, among other things. The Indo-Chinese government had no other alternative but to comply, and by September 22nd, the Japanese had successfully negotiated to station 6,000 troops in Tonkin and to move 20,000 soldiers through Tonkin to Yunnan. The Indochina Expeditionary Army under General Nishimura Takuma was then formed, starting to travel to their destination on the same day. But at the same time, General Kuno Seiichi's 22nd Army at Nanning independently invaded and
Kuno Seiichi independently invaded the French Indochina, and he got the north part of Indochina, but because of that, the America doubled their support in the Chinese, and he was actually punished because of that independent invasion.
Nam and started to fight local forces across the border. The fighting ended when General Maurice Martin's Indo-Chinese forces got surrounded at Langsun, finally surrendering on September 25th. Furthermore, the IJN blockaded the Gulf of Tonkin, and Nishimura landed in Indochina, fighting a series of minor battles at Dongtak, Haiphong, and Hanoi. By the evening of September 26th, Kuno's forces had reached Laotsai at the Yunnan border, and Indo-Chinese resistance had crumbled. The invasion was a huge success, but it was against Tokyo's wishes due to the agreement that the Japanese had reached. All occupied towns would then be returned, and Kuno would be punished for his insubordination, although the Japanese were now undisputed in the region and could then station 40,000 soldiers in northern Indochina. But the Japanese success wouldn't be long-lasting, as the British consequently decided in October to open the Burma Road, connecting the Burmese city of Lashio with Yunnan's capital at Kunming. Thus, to the relief of Chiang's government, a new lifeline was created, allowing the Chinese to continue to resist for the next few years. Moreover, General Sonobe Waichiro's 11th Army tried to capitalize on the last victory in Yichang to completely take over the province of Hubei. On November 25th, the Japanese offensive began, striking against the Chinese defenses east and west of the Xiang River and enjoying some initial successes. But in coordination with local guerrillas, Li Zongren's forces would manage to stop the invaders and counterattack, forcing the Japanese to retreat by November 30th. Meanwhile, the US government was outraged and alarmed by the Japanese invasion of Indochina, so President Roosevelt would then double the amount of aid delivered to China and would order the evacuation of all Americans in the Far East. Although the Americans were still woefully unprepared for a war in the Pacific, they now began to see that a confrontation with the Japanese
it's inevitable. It's very, very inevitable.
Was very possible. Japan's 1940 move into Vichy-controlled Indochina, along with its war with China, withdrawal from the League of Nations, alliance with Germany and Italy, and increasing militarization, raised tension and induced the United States to intensify its measures to restrain Japan's economy. Scrap metal shipments to Japan were embargoed, and the Panama Canal closed to Japanese trade. Despite these moves, in early 1941, Japan moved into southern Indochina, thereby threatening British Malaya, North Borneo and Brunei. On December 29th, FDR then delivered his tough Arsenal of Democracy speech against Germany and Japan, clearly identifying them as the enemies of democracy, and finally dropping the neutrality doctrine that had been sponsored in the 30s.
We must be the great arsenal of democracy. For us, this is an emergency, as serious as war itself. We must apply ourselves to our task with the same resolution, the same sense of urgency, the same spirit of patriotism and sacrifice, as we would show were we at war. Okay.
Consequently, American industries would start to arm and support China and the Allies in their respective wars. This would eventually lead to the Lend-Lease program of March 11, 1941, in which the US pledged to support the Allies and China with food, oil, warships, warplanes, and other weaponry.
Like oversimplified said, there's like a small skit where Churchill in oversimplified video, when Churchill asked Franklin D. Roosevelt to join the war, but he said no, he's going to be neutral, but here, get some guns. I love oversimplified, okay?
The US froze Japanese assets on July 26, 1941, and on August 1st, established an embargo on oil and gasoline exports to Japan.
That's the key resource for their expansion. So now they're now planning to invade Southeast Asia, knowing that they're not gonna get their oil from the US, knowing that most of the oil they have are from the US. So,
which was a strong response, as 80% of Japan's oil was coming from the US, and oil was crucial for war making in that period. Concurrently, the Kingdom of Thailand, which had seen a rise of ultra-nationalism and the establishment of a dictatorship under Plek Phibun in the last few years, also detected the weakness in French Indochina and thus decided to take back some disputed areas that had been ceded in the last century. After the outbreak of border skirmishes, the Thais started aerial bombing runs over the main Indo-Chinese cities and launched an offensive on Laos and Cambodia in early January. Laos would be quickly overrun, but French resistance in Cambodia would be fierce, and with the French naval victory at the Battle of Ko Chang on January 17th, the situation soon started to deteriorate for the Thais. Fearing a French victory in the war, the Japanese would then intervene, forcing the Indo-Chinese government to sign an armistice and to cede the disputed provinces. This was a personal victory for Phibun, but the real beneficiaries of the war would be the Japanese, who further increased their influence in both Thailand and Indochina.
So he started negotiating guarantees with the British and America. So yeah, that's the reason why Japanese lost trust on him.
Fearing a Japanese takeover, Phibun would then reach out to the US and the UK for guarantees, consequently stressing his relationship with Japan. And back in China, 1941 would start with the sudden outbreak of hostilities between nationalists and communists. Chiang Kai-shek ordered a withdrawal of the Fourth Army from Anhui and Jiangsu in late December. As a result of numerous alleged treacherous acts and harassment, Chiang would take action of retribution against the communists. On January 7th, while withdrawing from Anhui and Jiangsu, the communist new Fourth Army was, allegedly, ambushed and encircled by an 80,000-strong nationalist force of Gu Jitong's Third War Area. After heavy fighting and many casualties, only 2,000 communist soldiers were able to break out of the encirclement by January 13th. This marked the end of the second
that's the worst time to do that. You need everything, knowing that there's a huge threat this trying to invade your country, and you're gonna start that? That's a mistake. No, that's a mistake. That infuriated Mao Zedong, and yeah, that's the end of the Second United Front.
This marked the end of the Second United Front, as the nationalist act of treachery would destroy any possibility of further cooperation. At the same time, Sonobe would start 2 new operations against South Han.
He used the opportunity. But anyway, yeah. Don't forget they're still at civil war, so
Nan and western Hubei, as well as a large offensive against the city of Shanghao. Yet
But they
again,
still
the
lost.
Chinese would successfully flank and defeat the Japanese invasions by late March, inflicting heavy casualties and forcing the invaders to retreat and to leave behind substantial amounts of military equipment and supplies.
they're losing.
As the latest defeats were very demoralizing for the Japanese forces, their victory at the Battle of South Shanxi in May would luckily restore their fighting spirit. On May 7th, General Tada Hayao's North China Area Army launched a full offensive against the mountainous region of South Shanxi, quickly breaking through the Chinese defensive lines at Mengshan, Jiyuan, Hengpu and Wangyuan, and managing to encircle the Nationalist Army as a result. Worthy of mention is that the Communist 8th Route Army nearby refused to assist the Nationalist forces in the struggle in retribution for the South Anhui incident.
Yeah, why am I going to help you? And yeah, that's because why are you even going to start that? You need everything. There's like, they're not the threat. That's maybe after defeating the biggest threat that you have, Japan, and after that, fight. You know, I know it's fighting is bad, but really, you're gonna start now while there's like a country trying to invade you, like.
And in the struggle allowed them to be surrounded and destroyed. This was remembered as one of the worst defeats of the entire war for China. Meanwhile, the outbreak of the German invasion of Russia in late June
Operation
permitted
Barbarossa.
Japan to sign a non-aggression pact with the Soviet Union, and thus to secure its northern border in case of war with the Allies. This finally allowed the Japanese to begin preparations for a strike against the resource-rich region of Southeast Asia.
Yeah, because of that non-aggression pact, they're just gonna leave it there. Because remember that they still have disputes with the Soviet Union in their border, so that's the reason why it took them a while to plan to attack Southeast Asia.
Which had been earmarked to provide the necessary raw material for Japan's industry. The Dutch East Indies and their precious rubber plantations and oil fields were one of the most important objectives of the Japanese Empire. So on July 21st, more than 50,000 soldiers would invade southern Indochina to prepare naval bases against the Dutch colony. Accurately detecting the intentions of the Japanese, FDR would form the USAFFE in response, nationalizing the Philippine Army and appointing General Douglas MacArthur to lead American forces in the Pacific. In coordination with the British and the Dutch, he would also stop the exports of iron ore, steel and oil to the Japanese. And as we've seen, this was a crippling embargo for Japan, as the empire relied on foreign exports for its war machine, but also for its home economy. FDR's gamble was to put an end to the Japanese expansion, but Japan's leaders now saw war with the West as their best option, encouraged by their Nazi allies that were overrunning Europe. On September 3rd, the Supreme War Council met at the Liaison Conference and decided that if the US didn't resume oil shipments by October, then they would start preparations for a simultaneous attack against the Dutch East Indies, the Philippines and Malaysia. The Commander-in-Chief of the IJN, Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, also proposed
Admiral Yamamoto Isoroku, yes. Okay, so yeah, he planned this. He planned for months. He planned to attack Pearl Harbor. We know that because we started in episode 1 in the Pacific War about the attack on Pearl Harbor, and next we learned more about the attack on Pearl Harbor in Montemayor's video. And yes, Admiral Yamamoto's main target was actually carriers, but the carriers? Correct me if I'm wrong, yes, it's maybe carriers. But the problem is, the carriers aren't in Pearl Harbor at that time, so yeah.
Posed a plan for a surprise attack against Pearl Harbor, intending to destroy the American Pacific Fleet in one decisive strike. This was very advantageous, because if the US lost their main naval forces in the Pacific, then it would take them years to build another fleet capable of fighting against the IJN, and that would give the Japanese a free hand to expand in Southeast Asia. While tensions in the Pacific reached a climax, the 11th Army, now under General Anami Kurachika, launched a new offensive against the city of Changsha. On September 27th, the Japanese managed to enter the city, but by October 8th, successful Chinese counterattacks carried out by General Xu Yue had expelled the invaders once more. This would end up being the last Japanese operation in China before the outbreak of hostilities with the West. As negotiations with the US were leading nowhere, on November 26th, a Japanese task force of 6 aircraft carriers left the Kuril Islands, heading to Hawaii in strict radio silence, and troop transports also started to move southwards from Formosa. With the US continuing to demand the Japanese completely withdraw from China and Indochina, by the start of December, Emperor Hirohito had approved the war declaration, setting in motion the attack on Pearl Harbor and the start of the Pacific War. Now there was no turning back for the Japanese Empire. Join us on December 7th, the 80th anniversary of Pearl Harbor, for special coverage of the operation that would begin one of the deadliest wars of the 20th century.
We saw that video.
Make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to be notified. Please consider liking, commenting, and sharing. It helps immensely. Our videos would...
Okay, so that's the end. Okay, now we're done, folks. Yep, episode 0.7 of the series, and we learned a lot, and it's amazing. Thank you for watching. Like and subscribe for more videos like this, and yes, next video might actually be different. It's about a killer. Spoilers. Okay, goodbye.